and welcome. I have a slightly husky voice today.
Especially for this occasion.
If you would like to give me feedback about it later, that is welcome. Welcome to our session, Getting the Best from Feedback Without Demotivating People. Welcome. I am Janine.
I'm Paul, in case you were wondering which was which.
And as Ralph said, we are the Solutions Focus, and we work with organisations. We train people in Solutions Focus. We coach, we write, and often people come to us and they want to learn something and they don't care about Solutions Focus. So we had many requests for people saying, we want to know how to give feedback. And when you hear the word feedback, what do you think? Let me give you some feedback, right? So they came to us and we thought about this. And we thought, well, how can we do this in a way that is helpful and resourceful and doesn't destroy or demotivate people? And today, this session is the session that we run for managers. So you are experiencing it as managers would experience it. So we welcome you and we wish you to enjoy it and engage and discuss.
And of course, we're not treating you just as managers, we are treating you as solution-focused experts. So from time to time, we'll step above or a meta view of things that we're doing. And if we've time at the end, maybe we'll look at some of those aspects too. So this is what we would share with our participants, the outcomes that we've agreed with the client. We're going to look at what is useful and effective feedback, how to do it productively and constructively, have a go with a feedback model called Spiral, and you'll get to have a go with that today. Aha. So we're going to have a shout out of something that gets us all engaged, speaking to each other. A personal quality or skill that has the same first letter as the first letter of your name. And by name, you could choose your first name, your surname, or if, like me, you're blessed with a middle name of Z, you could choose that. Janine, would you care to demonstrate, please?
My name is Janine, actually Sarah Waldman. I like to think I am welcoming.
Oh. So shouting out, shout out your name and your adjective. Raise a hand, I'll point to you. We'll do it as quick fire as we can.
Lines loving.
Healthy, enthusiastic.
Lovely. Oh, there's double echoes and ventriloquism as skills in the room. Ursula useful. And what was the one at the back? No, she's making notes now. That's very good. Couple more. Yes, at the back. You are at the back. It's fine. Yes.
Stefan Smiling.
Stefan Smiling. Hannah-Laura Honest. So this quality or resource that you have identified in yourself might be the sort of thing that people will feed back to you if they're having conversations. And it attunes us to thinking of resourceful qualities, skills, things we might notice in other people that we may be able to feed back to them. So we have an introduction to the idea of resourcefulness and the possibility of sharing it. Today, context for feedback. So we're talking about working within a specific organisation usually. What do people already know? They're going to meet the feedback model, question and answer and feedback, and that would be within a 90-minute session. Still me?
We do work together quite a lot, you know.
I always find I'm working too hard. What's going on here? Make some notes and invite you to do this for real, for yourself now, as we would do with the managers within a session. So everyone's going to make a note of some feedback they'd like to give for real. Something whereby there is a person or people that you want to give feedback to. And why? Why do you want to give feedback to that person? What was that prompt that Janine referenced earlier of, I want to give you some feedback? And you're going to use those later in the practice. And we're going to hear 2 or 3 of them now, so that we've got a sense of the range, the window of possibilities for which feedback might be appropriate and that we're going to be discussing during this session. So when I ask you now to share who you want to give feedback to and why, you don't need to give their name of that person, but you can tell us what your relationship to them is. So it might be my partner or my spouse, business partner, person who works for me, whoever. Who has someone that they have identified that they would like to give feedback to and can tell us why? Thank you very much for this session. We'll see you at lunch. Dominic.
Well, enthusiastic person next to me, and I would like to give her feedback, what I appreciate about her, just to make my life much better.
The lovely example. So we know who we want to give feedback to, the nature of the feedback, and the reason why, what you hope will happen as a result of giving the feedback.
We have to leave now, I'm sorry.
Someone else. Yes.
I would like to give feedback to the person next to me who always gives me really good questions. And the reason why I want to say this is because I want some more questions.
So a purpose of developing an ongoing conversation to get some more useful elements from that person. And when we're hearing managers talk, they often want to give feedback so that the person they're giving feedback to works better with them in some way, does their job better in some way that makes the manager's life easier. And there's one here.
I would like to give feedback to a manager in a company I know in order to help that company be more supportive to their employees so they have less burnout.
Right. So you've identified some things that you've seen, you'd like to share that back with them so that they'll be more supportive and that there'll be less burnout as a result. Again, a good classic case of feedback opportunity.
Yes, I want to give feedback to a manager because he doesn't understand how important the project is and he doesn't support it enough.
And we've really got to knock this into his head. Right. Good. Thanks, Stefan. Still me? Yeah. You coming in now?
I'll do something.
Okay.
Okay. We know that you know some things about feedback, about giving feedback. Maybe you have done this in a way that it's worked really well in the past, or someone has given you feedback and you really like the way they did that. So we are going to now invite you to share your tips on giving feedback. Please, can you find yourself a group of people, maybe between 3 and 5, 4 or 5 people? So just huddle with them. We're going to start here. What do you have for us? One tip from this group for giving. Yeah.
Circumstances matter.
Say a bit more. Circumstances matter. So set it up clearly. Yep. Circumstances matter. Thank you. And over here, what do you have? A tip for us? One tip for us.
Prepare yourself for giving feedback.
Yeah, prepare. And that could mean script it, write it down.
Calming yourself down.
How do you calm yourself down?
I'm not so good at it.
I know what we do. We rub our hands. Right, we learned that yesterday. Thank you. And another different tip from here.
Forward, like turn it into positives.
Yeah, turn it into positives. Thank you. Another one from here, something different.
Ask
if the person is willing to receive.
How would you say that? How would you say that?
I would like to talk to you about X, Y. Are you willing to talk with me?
Yeah, nice. So we bring them in, an invitation to the conversation. Thank you. And here. Is it? You can whisper it to me.
We're talking about, of course, being specific. No matter whether you're giving positive feedback or negative feedback, and turn it into a dialogue. For instance, saying, I want you to perform differently. Then actually also add on to, because that would enable you to. So it becomes a cooperation more that it's not, I want you to do your job, but actually if you do your job better or do it at all, then it actually, I can do something in my job as well. So we are connected.
So being specific, making that connection, and also expressing the reason for or the benefit from the change or the desired behavior. Thank you, really nice. Here.
Yeah, several things. One was, don't know whether you know the research by David Rock. He suggests that when you use, may I give you feedback, that immediately raises resistance. So stop giving push feedback in the sense of take the feedback, everyone. Yeah. Then also feedback is normally when you say this kind of things, it's immediately just one-sided. There's no discussion in the word because it's just giving back. But in the word is not, how do I get now also a conversation going? So that would be important. So that's why just stop sandwich stuff, because that's just...
Yeah, has everyone heard of the sandwich? Yeah. But this idea that if we could say good, bad, good, people will transform. But ultimately they hear good and they're thinking, where's the bad?
What's going to come, indeed. Then timing. Dominic mentioned timing. Mm-hmm. Should we give it now or later? And what is the aim? And should I shut up later or better?
What is my purpose? When is it useful?
And then also, Elfie mentioned agreement about feedback. What is it that we want? For example, when you're writing a book, Elfie mentioned there is a certain agreement. Yes, you will get feedback, but what kind? What is it good for? What do we want? How does it help?
Yeah, that's really nice, almost establishing in advance what feedback we want. How will we do that? When will we do it? And that it can be a dialogue. We talk about giving, and we will share that in how we give feedback. But of course, it can be a conversation that we create.
And Jan also brought in the resource shower, resource gossip. That's also kind of...
Yeah, a few nods. It's a good idea by Ralph, right? That we should resource gossip. Thank you.
May I just add something, because I also find it interesting thinking about concepts to challenge this idea of feedback and give it a new meaning in what we are doing here together. So what is it that we want to do together in, why do we think we need feedback for something, and what for, right? And to have a conversation about that as well, I think can sometimes really transform things instead of using a sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about what surrounds it, because feedback doesn't happen in isolation. It's part of the system. Thank you. You have something for us?
I think we have most of the things were already mentioned. Maybe one thing we have is, well, I look at the perspective of a leader, and so what I in general try to establish is a feeling of safety. So talking about everything is much easier, even about things that are critical or have to improve. Mm-hmm. So it's a more general task, I think.
So we have created an environment of safety, and even how we give feedback can do that, can contribute and add to it. Thank you. Anything else? Yeah.
It just comes to my mind that it's also a sort of a cultural thing. So if you should also ask for feedback yourself. So if the feedback always only go one way, it becomes a bit stiff and formal. But if you yourself make sure that you're open to feedback, I think that could create a safe space as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've experienced in one company that they were focusing on only giving positive feedback, that for workers there was not safe. If I make a mistake, I will not know it. So don't only give positive feedback, I would say.
And when we work with organisations, they feel they have to tell people, you know, what it is that they need to improve.
Yeah,
it's a debate.
It wasn't safe for the worker knowing that if he would make a mistake, he would not know about it. They wouldn't tell him.
So he didn't feel safe.
He only would get positive feedback. So it was not safe for him.
Okay.
And that was a quite big learning for me.
Yeah. So noticing that some people feel safer when they get this kind of feedback.
There's research in the positive psychology about this. I mean, you're blasting when you have 3-to-1 and so on, but there's also a research paper that when it comes to 11-to-1 or even more positive side, that it flips around, that it's not supporting growth anymore.
Okay. So here we have get the balance right, whatever that balance is for the person, the organisation, the culture.
And it could make a difference if you bring yourself in and say, as a feedback giver, say, why is it important for me, whether it's something positive or negative, but also always to bring in yourself.
Absolutely, because we are part of the conversation. We've heard about co-creation and all the interactions matter.
I'm wondering when you were saying add the importance to the feedback, I was just had this immediate reaction, so the importance of the question, the feedback, the importance of the feedback, or as well the expectation that may be attached to it. And this might not be the same, and just complete with my thought.
I mean, I hear. Do you have anything, Jesper? Yeah, okay. Where did it come from? From here? Yeah.
I just noticed for kind of a interesting thing how we use the word feedback. So if I use it, I want to give feedback. It's kind of this strategic thing of how do I do that and when is the right timing, etc. And then there is this kind of everyday conversation, just telling someone, oh, I didn't like that. Not kind of in a strategic way, but just like a comment. And the other person might say, oh, thank you, or not for the feedback. So kind of it's interesting just how we use it, because in everyday life I say many things that I don't consider as a feedback, but others might.
Yeah. So it's part of the conversation, and whilst we might specifically say, I'm going to give you feedback, it's something that we are doing day on day. And these skills and these models that we work with, they can be used in that formal setting, but equally in a conversation or a moment in time.
And I think if you do it formally, it's often, I think we often try to fool people with all these rules. And if we don't do it formally, just are in an everyday conversation, just say something. I like that kind of this strategic way of doing things compared to everyday just a remark. Yeah. And that's kind of a nice difference for me to note.
And again, it fits with the culture, what we expect. A lot of the organisations we work with, they have this formality. They like it, it works for them.
It tends to be formal in the organisations that they're going to give feedback and it will be announced and labelled as such. We're coming from, as are you, a solution-focused perspective where any conversation can be used to make useful differences, and a lot of that could be captured within this informal feedback. So we'll try and make a point somewhere along the line within the sessions that the skills they're using and the thinking that goes into the model is not confined to that. They can use it elsewhere too. And some of them get that.
We do run other courses on conversations.
Yeah, I think it's important for the context in which this feedback that we're talking about here happens is fairly narrow. We have sessions with the same company on effective conversations, on difficult conversations. They're two different things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's different content in each one.
Performance conversations.
And performance conversations. And some people come on the feedback one with an interest in performance conversation more broadly. So this is a tiny part often of other conversations, or it's a moment in which feedback is given. The interesting, the word, in interest of the etymology of the word feedback, it comes from systems where there are forces and one feeds back something to another, either to dampen or amplify an effect. So there's a metaphorical engineering element already in the word feedback and the understanding that people might have of feedback as a process. So we hear the tips from the group, and they're usually pretty good at saying some of the things that you've said about the practical elements. For example, thinking of where it might take place and timing. They're usually quite good on it's not just good, it's not just bad, both within it. They don't tend to have some of the sophisticated ideas that you've had on really working with the context to your advantage. You've gone beyond where most of our participants offer tips, which is fine, of course, absolutely to do that today. And we have 10 tips that we share, knowing that they'll already have come up with some, so we're reinforcing their ideas that they know about giving feedback and maybe thinking about it and categorizing it in certain ways will be useful for them. So our top tips: be specific. We want them to describe details of particular incidents as examples of what that person did or said. And the aim there, we tell them, is to create something that the person they're giving feedback to recognizes as something that they have done or tend to do, so that they make that connection of, oh, you're talking about this thing I do or this thing that I say or have said in a particular incident. Describe facts, be objective. Describe facts rather than opinions. So here's what I see, here's what I hear if I'm observing, rather than what I think about it. Be direct, don't avoid the issue, be clear in what you say. We know that within organizations, sometimes people want to share useful information with a colleague, and then they don't quite get around to it in the conversation. So courageous, boldness, go for it. Keep it simple. If they give too much detail or very long lists of incidents, then it's overwhelming, and a long list of bad things can be undermining. And be sensitive, empathetic. Before you speak, think about what it will be like to be the person receiving it and to take account of feelings. Be practical. I think you made a very strong point about this over here, that the person can do something different once they've heard the feedback. If they can't change or learn something from it, then it's not really a topic for feedback, it's something else. Be positive, even if you're giving negative or critical feedback. Much of what the person did may have been good, surrounding context, and acknowledge that. And some people, we think, have an attitude or stance towards feedback. So we say, even if you don't need praise or someone else to tell you that you've done a good job, other people might. It opens up that permission to give people praise. Be supportive in your stance. Speak in the spirit of wanting to make things better. So good feedback lets the recipient know that the giver really cares about them developing and wants them to succeed. This is, again, very collaborative, I think, in the stance or the approach. Speak about the behavior, not the person. So we're commenting on a task or an action or something someone said, not on the personality of the recipient. And to leave the next step with the recipient. So we're treating the person as someone who is making choices about how to behave and how to act that will follow the conversation, and they walk away with that as their turn, their responsibility. And we make this handout available to them, either in person or online. And then we introduce the solution-focused feedback model.
or a solutions-focused feedback model.
A solution-focused feedback model.
I would like to point out, but I like the aspiration.
Should we collect in the tips?
We'll collect them afterwards and make these
We're going to collect the tip sheets afterwards up on the stage, so that we've got we can make a digital record of all the wisdom, and that can be distributed amongst the group. And it values the contribution of the participants who have asked for it. We're not saying, yeah, okay, but here's the list. It's adding to your list and giving another way of framing it.
Mm-hmm. We're going to introduce you to Spiral. We're going to show you some examples, and then we're going to invite you to have a go. And there will be a handout. So here you can see the model. We have the start, the position, and then we move into one of two ways, if it's problematic or positive. And then we wrap up in a little bit more detail. So when we start, we want to find a suitable place or time. And actually this was really significant with managers. Find a time, find a place. Have you got a minute if it's something small, or, but you know, I'd like to speak to you later. Can we talk, please? Once we have started, we then position our feedback. And this is where you saw the model split into two avenues. So if it's problematic, we are going to describe the problem minimally in some way. What you saw, what you heard, keeping it fact-based rather than assumption or something we can't see.
Describing the impact as well?
It depends. As practitioners, we might say, if it's problematic, yeah, I noticed that I noticed that the first paragraph of your report was very wordy. This lost the reader within the first 5 minutes. Something, we might do that, absolutely. If it's positive, we identify the specific situation. What was it we saw? What happened? If it's problematic, we have the I, the magic word. What do you want to see instead? What does good look like? It would be great to see a very clear first line to that report. Yeah.
Example, like?
Yeah, instead. So it would be wonderful to see a very clear first line to your report. It's wonderful when you turn up to meetings on time. So what would you like to be instead? You're always late. I'd like to see you turn up on time. Yep. If it's positive, we are going to intensify it. I love the way you wrote that report. Specifically, how the first 3 words captured my imagination. Are we okay? So we really amplify the good. We then talk about the benefit of what you do. So if you turn up on meetings, we get to hear your good ideas. If your report is very clear, people will listen to you. If you keep doing this, maybe you'll get a promotion. If it's something good, if you do more of this, this will lead to more people listening to you or a certain reward. So when we talk about reward, it's the benefits for the person, not financial reward.
Not in Britain.
We do often get people saying reward, what if we can't pay them? But here we're talking about benefits. It's just that we couldn't say spirab. We have to say spiral. So the R works better. Spibal. So what's the benefit? And then action and leave. So we have a next step agreement. And we finish up when we review. Now, we have presented this as giving feedback. Let me tell you this. But we know that there are opportunities for conversations and coaching and exploration. So we might invite someone to say, what's the reward or benefit? What's the next step you can take? When would you like to review? But as a framework, we can just give feedback. We okay with that? And we have some videos of this in action.
Yep, so we're going to illustrate in a call center setting with an online giving of feedback. So you'll see one end of a Zoom call where you'll see the giver of the feedback talking to a recipient who you won't see, who works in a call center. It's the same call center in each case. We hired some actors and actresses, I don't know if you'll recognize them, who will offer the feedback. It's not me and Janine, definitely not. We're starting with the instead, and then we'll see intensify.
So the next thing, JJ, during this weekly catch-up is that I've been listening to some of your calls. As you know, they're recorded for these purposes, and one in particular gave me some concern. It was last Thursday afternoon, and you were talking to a woman, and she was having problems with her battery life. You kept interrupting her when she was explaining the problem, so she was not able to complete her sentences. And when she gave us feedback online afterwards, she said that she found you rude. So in future, I'd like it if you would let people speak and fully explain themselves. Don't interrupt them, even if you think you know what the problem is. Then they're going to feel heard, and you can be sure that you're dealing with an accurate issue. If you do that, then I'm sure your ratings will go up and you'll get better feedback from the customers. And of course, the happier customer is good for the business. You'll find that less arguing with the customer also means that your calls are going to get shorter. And that means that we can get to more people during these busy times. Okay? So I'd like you to think about how you can apply that over the next week on your calls. And then we'll check in a week's time and see what improvements you've made and what sort of feedback difference we're receiving from our customers.
Good, isn't he? The task for you, which I forgot to mention, was to identify the steps of spiral as you're listening. So you can do that with the other performer that we brought in to play the part of the giver of feedback. That one we just saw was instead, an undesirable behavior to be replaced with something instead. This one's intensify, the other route of spiral.
Catch up, it's lovely to see you. I've been listening in on some of your calls, and one in particular stood out as exceptional. It was last Friday afternoon when you were talking to a woman who was having problems with her battery. You handled the call really well. In particular, you were patient and calm, and you went through everything in a logical order. That can be difficult to do when faced with such a tricky customer, and you handled it particularly well given that her Wi-Fi connection was unstable. I especially liked how you offered to call her back on a landline when the mobile connection was poor. This showed really good customer service and paying attention to her needs. She was delighted, which was reflected in her post-call feedback survey, and we kept a customer. If you keep doing this, you'll make supervisor in no time. Do keep it up. And what do you think about jotting down some of the things that work for you so we can share it with others, and it'll also help you with other tricky conversations? Let's check in next week.
Normally, there's movement that goes with that sound. Lots of micro movements, but today, okay.
Very static, thank you. So we've described spiral. We've shown some examples of the two possible routes. And now it's your turn to remember who you identified at the beginning of the session that you would like to give feedback to, and take a moment to think through. Yeah, we're going to pass out some spirals. There's a prompt or an aide-memoire, who you'd like to give feedback to, and how Spiral might support the giving of that feedback for you if you use it as a framework to construct your feedback. So make a couple of notes, either on paper or mentally, and then we'll get into some groups and practice giving feedback. So, let's all stand up. And I know that some of you said you were going to give feedback eventually to the person next to you. So for the rehearsal and the practice, it's really important you don't do that, because we don't want to spoil the surprise. So we're going to form groups of 3, and here's an opportunity, a soul world opportunity, to meet 2 people who you don't know so well. So that it's people that look interesting across a room, or you've been wondering about them from a distance. Find a new group of 3, please. So, we're going to reflect on round 1, and we'll start the reflections by hearing some things that the manager, the person who was giving the feedback, did well. And the manager can contribute to that too if they have reflections on how useful the model was, or if it supported you in some way. Who's got a reflection on round 1? One here to start with. Thank you. We'll come around with the microphone.
I thought that the manager was quite factual, or the feedback giver was quite factual about the reason for the feedback, and also clear about where to go, the next step, and thoughts about what it would bring for the manager to do these suggestions, and also giving suggestions to bring others, so it could be like a dialogue for everyone.
So it sounds like it was structured.
Completely structured.
And quite a lot in there in a 4-minute
really good
conversation. Well done, that manager. Thank you. Who'd like microphone next?
Or not. As in, you don't need to speak into it.
Other reflections on round 1? What did the manager do well? What did you notice?
I can share.
Over here, thank you.
We didn't have a manager setting.
Okay.
But still, giving feedback as a consultant from outside the system.
Yes.
Yeah, we had this setting, and it's very useful, the structure. It makes things very easy. And with this reward thing, I thought it could also, if you do it in a light, to bring a bit lightness in, you could also call it risks. It could be reward, or it could also be a risk. If you do more of this, then you get more recognized, more attention. And while trying it out, I thought, yeah, this risk thing maybe has a nice, like a joke aspect, or makes it maybe a bit lighter if I'm not the person who is going to reward this.
Yes.
I don't know if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. I mean, there is a saying in management speak of the risk-reward ratio, which is sometimes looked at when you're doing a risk analysis. So I think that would be a nice addition to how you might do that. And when I'm saying manager, that is for shorthand for the person giving the feedback. So within our sessions, not just here, but with organizations, people are giving feedback from a consultant or coach perspective, or parent or family member perspective as well, quite often. So that's who they have in mind, and that's okay. Any others for round 1? There we go, thank you.
Hi. I was not able to do the exercise because you were talking while we were trying to do the exercise. So it would be really beautiful if you would change that in the next round. So it's possible, you know, I can concentrate on that. That would be so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Use of the feedback.
Well, actually, I missed the action and leave.
Yeah.
Where's the reward? 2 comments. We weren't talking while you were doing the exercise, really, were we? Yes. Only after 4 minutes, when time was up. And that's the second point, is that the time of a training session, a practice session, is artificial. Of course it is, and you may not have time to do everything. So we always say this, and that in real life you would have that opportunity to have the full conversation with the time needed that you've set aside with that person or that's available in that setting. Yeah, Ralph.
Now I get into trouble. And I was thinking about this earlier in your model, because you state very clearly what happened and so on. And in the nonviolent communication, whenever one could say, no, that's not correct, then you made a mistake in framing what you saw, heard, or so on. Esther described exactly what she experienced. And now you say, no, this didn't happen. People are asking about discussions. But the trouble in the model is when you state as clearly as you want, the moment someone says, no, that's not true, you're already getting into a fight very early. Yeah? So I'm not sure this is so helpful to always try to state exactly, because as an observer, you cannot observe everything that happens. So I'd like to keep that open for later rounds. And I think there is, to me, there feels a bit of a gap. Yes.
Okay, I appreciate the comments. We're working in an environment in these organizations where a typical manager is coming on the course because they want to tell somebody about something that's upsetting them, and they think that person's doing it wrong. So we're on a quite long path, possibly, to a more solution-focused, conversational way of doing it, from not necessarily the most promising starting point. We have, this is to go a little bit ahead of what we're going to do here, but I think it helps to frame and contextualize what we're doing. The instead is a really important part of this simple framework model that's a starting point. And if you start to have managers talk about instead, some of them, by the end of 90 minutes, from not knowing about this, come to a realization that they don't have to describe the problem. You only perhaps need to describe what you'd like to see happen, and that can be a co-constructed, what would we like to see happen, that is within the competence and capability of the person receiving the feedback. So this is the Günter Lueger's idea of positive difference that's very informative in solution-focused thinking, of using what you do right to correct or replace what you do wrong. And you can get to that by just releasing a little bit of the scaffolding of the spiral framework. So that's a very good point, but it's not one that is always realized by the manager, or that they would accept at the beginning of the 90-minute conversation. Yeah. They want to see it work. This is why we have practice rounds, so they can have that experience. And they would say, I know that there's going to be an argument here, for example. Janine? So very simply, we might just say to someone, it was great to see you at 9 a.m. this morning. And it would be, or no, we could say, it would be great to have you there at the beginning of the meeting, rather than saying, I've noticed you're late all the time. So that's right. Yes. So ideally, if we were working in a completely solutions-orientated way, but our managers, when we tried that, they go, but we have to tell them. So we like people to work that out for themselves, and we quite often get your question.
which says, but they're going to argue with me, and we say, aha. So it's a really good point.
Let's have another opportunity for practice, which we won't talk over, but we will time. So, second person to practice their giving of some feedback, and you can take into account the tips from round one that you've just heard and the experience you had yourself in round one. Then we'll ring a bell after 4 minutes and invite you to move into round 3. That's what's going to happen. Go. So in this session, the Soul Conference session, which is the same length of time as we've been doing this online, 90-minute session, there's been a lot more discussion than we have typically with the managers. And not because we're constraining the discussion, they just enjoy sharing tips, thinking about when they're going to use it, seeing the model at work, practicing it, reflecting briefly, and taking it away with various degrees of confidence in what they're going to do next. About half the time, we do have enough time at the end to show the positive difference and illustrate that we mentioned when the idea of argument came about. So we'll show you briefly what we do with that. It's a lovely bit of work by Günther Lueger from University of Vienna. We should bring him in here and applaud him. So this is a sophisticated idea, but it's sometimes reached and liked by people after just a 90-minute session, of using good performance to feed back on poor performance. So you know that there's been poor performance, but there's ways of doing it that are not going to be a surprise to solution-focused practitioners. Here's how we present it based on Günther's work. So you can imagine performance over the course of a period of time. Here we have, I think, a year. And you can characterize it as good, average, or poor, and represent it with a straight line.
There's no straight line.
No, we don't. Okay.
No, we don't have a straight line. There should be one.
And the straight line rating is unrealistic because performance varies over time. There were some curly lines there a moment ago.
Yeah. So it's often, you know, when you have that appraisal once a year and someone ticks a box and says, you're good, as if you've been good for 365 days, or poor. But we think it's a
more realistic representation is variation over time, different performance within the same specific activity, which is often what feedback is about, how you make the sales call, how you show up for meetings. And performance varies over time. And we could look at the poor performance times, describe them, perhaps get into arguments about them. They're represented by these red circles. Or we could look at the times when you're at your best. When did you do good sales call? When were you at a meeting on time? When did you contribute well? When was your presentation excellent? Whatever the specific activity is. And now within that specific activity, we've got a range of behaviors and performance, and we can ask, what were you doing when you were doing it well that was different from when you were doing it not so well? And people are then less likely to argue because they're going to be describing their good performance. And then as the manager, you have the opportunity to contribute, co-create what good looks like by saying, yes, I recognize that you were speaking in clear sentences. What we also would like to see is logical progression, for example. So we can use good performance to feedback on poor performance in very specific areas of activity. For example,
here is an example shared with us by our good friend Björn Johansson. And in Sweden, there were 2 factories, Kraft, you're all familiar with Kraft Foods, built at the same time. And you know, if you build 2 factories at the same time, this is a great opportunity for an experiment. And in one factory, they introduced solutions focus, and in the other, they didn't. And I think there is a PhD on it. There is definitely a paper. And overall, the Kraft factory showed the one with solutions focus showed better engagement performance. This is a specific example that Bjorn shared with us. In the factory, there was a machine, and the machine stamped all the food before it left. You know that date stamp? Really important, because if the food goes out without a stamp, it's wasted. Okay? The machine was a little bit temperamental, and the person, Peter, whose job was to look after the machine, was not very good. Now, they tried lots of things. Training, telling him off, asking him politely to do his job, psychometric testing, nothing worked. They'd even asked for a new machine, no money. They didn't want to sack him just yet. So the manager tried something different. The next time the machine broke down, the manager just waited. And eventually, Peter fixed the machine. And he went up to Peter and he said, you fixed the machine after 5 minutes, only 5 minutes. If you'd let it go for longer, it would have cost us more. Peter did look at him a little bit suspiciously, but said, thank you. Next time the machine broke down, Peter fixed it a little bit more quickly. The manager went up to him and said, hey, well done, you fixed the machine. I noticed it was a little bit faster this time. That was really helpful. How did you know to do that? And Peter said, I heard a rattle. I've noticed that when it's not so good, I'm hearing just a very faint noise. You wouldn't be able to hear it. And this went on. Every time Peter fixed the machine, the manager complimented him, the positive difference. And over time, Peter became the keeper of the machine. So you see positive difference at work.
Thank you. So thank you very much indeed for participating with us today and sharing your practice sessions with each other.